On June 18, 2020, the chilly waters off Gansby, South Africa, stretched wide and restless under the morning sun. Known worldwide as one of the most active great white shark hotspots, the town was home to fishermen who had worked the waters for generations. Among them was Peter van der Merwe, a 42-year-old father of two. Born and raised in the Western Cape, Peter grew up on the coast, where his father had taught him the fishing trade from a young age. His life revolved around the sea, which provided both his livelihood and a sense of peace. Peter was known in the community as a patient and caring man who deeply cared for his children. He often brought them along on calmer trips, eager to pass down the same lessons he had once learned. His 11-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son loved these outings. For them, the small boat rides meant time with their father, stories of the sea, and the thrill of seeing what might come up on the end of a line. On this particular day, the three of them set out in the early hours, their small wooden vessel rocking gently as it left the harbor. The waters shimmered with life. Seabirds swooped above, and the children laughed as they helped their father prepare lines and bait. The calm atmosphere gave no sign of what would soon unfold. After some time, Peter leaned over the side of the vessel to reel in a struggling catch. The rod bent sharply, the line pulling tight. He braced himself, gripping the railing for support as the children watched with excitement. In an instant, the sea beneath them erupted. A massive 16-foot great white surged upward, its enormous jaws clamping down on Peter's leg. The sudden impact snapped the fishing line and splintered the wooden railing in a burst of force. The boat rocked violently, tossing gear and buckets across the deck. The children screamed as they stumbled, clutching the edge to keep from falling overboard. Peter thrashed, striking out with desperate kicks as the predator dragged him toward the water. His hands grasped the railing, his body twisting as he fought against the immense power pulling him down. Foam and spray filled the air as the shark thrashed, tugging him away from the boat. The sound of splintering wood and crashing water filled the children's ears as they clung tightly to the side, terror in their eyes. Nearby fishermen, hearing the commotion, rushed closer, splashing at the surface and jabbing long poles toward the predator. Their efforts struck the water in loud bursts, but the great white held firm. Minutes of chaos followed, the predator tearing at the water in brutal surges. Blood spread across the waves, mixing with the foam as the struggle raged on. The predator eventually retreated, slipping into deeper water, but by then the surface told a grim story. Peter resurfaced briefly, motionless, the ocean around him stained red. His children cried out from the boat, their young faces frozen in horror as they witnessed the final moments of their father's fight. The water calmed only slightly as the predator slipped back into the deep, leaving behind floating debris and a red trail that stained the waves. Peter's body drifted briefly on the surface before vanishing beneath the rolling swells. His children clung to the edge of the boat, their small hands trembling as the cries of panic still echoed across the open sea. The nearby fishermen maneuvered their vessel closer, pulling alongside the smaller craft to shield it from further danger. Several men reached over to steady the children, guiding them safely into their own boat. Their faces were pale and shocked, their eyes wide as they stared at the water where their father had disappeared. The ocean, which had always been a place of learning and joy for them, had, in moments, turned into a nightmare. The rescuers kept watch on the surface, holes ready in case the predator returned, but the dorsal fin no longer appeared. The silence that followed carried a heavy weight, broken only by the sobs of the children and the crash of waves against the hulls. The return to shore was filled with grief. The harbor, usually alive with activity, grew hushed as word of what had happened spread. Medical teams were waiting, but there was nothing more to be done. The children were taken quickly into care, wrapped in blankets, though the sun was still high. Their faces were marked by shock rather than cold. The fishing community gathered, their expressions somber, knowing they had lost one of their own in the most brutal manner. Authorities confirmed the details later that day. The strike had been sudden and violent, carried out by a great white estimated at 16 feet in length. It was one of several aggressive encounters reported that week along the same stretch of coast. Experts explained that the waters around Gansby were known for seasonal spikes in predator activity, as the migration of prey drew the sharks closer to shore. The warning came too late for Peter, whose trip with his children had ended in tragedy. The aftermath weighed heavily on those who had witnessed it. The fishermen who tried to drive the predator away spoke of how helpless they felt in the face of such power. They described the scene as one of the most terrifying moments of their lives, far worse than storms or accidents at sea. For the children, the trauma of watching their father taken remained sharp. Though physically unharmed, their young lives were forever altered. In the weeks that followed, tributes were held in the community. Friends and neighbors supported the children, ensuring they would be well cared for despite their father's absence. The story spread beyond the small town, serving as a chilling reminder of the risks that come with life on the water. Even for those with generations of experience, the ocean held dangers that could not be controlled. The image of that day lingered long after the waves settled. It became a story told again and again, not just of loss, but of the brutal force of one of nature's deadliest predators. On June 5, 2025, the waters off Maui, Hawaii looked calm from the surface, but beneath them lay strong currents and poor visibility. That morning, a specialized police diving team prepared for an underwater recovery operation. Among them was Detective Mark Rivera, a 37-year-old officer with over a decade of service. Born and raised on Oahu, Mark had built his career in law enforcement, focusing on marine operations. He had been part of numerous underwater searches and rescues, earning a reputation for his calm demeanor under pressure and skill in challenging conditions. His colleagues trusted him deeply, and he often took the lead during high-risk dives. Mark had joined 4 other divers that day, all of whom were trained to handle recovery work in Hawaii's unpredictable waters. Their mission was to search for evidence connected to an ongoing investigation involving a sunken vessel. The job was demanding, requiring precision and endurance in challenging conditions. Equipped with wetsuits, regulators, and recovery tools, the men descended carefully, spreading out along the reef as they scanned the wreckage. The underwater environment was harsh. Currents tugged at their bodies, shifting sand clouds across the seabed. Visibility was poor, making every movement slow and deliberate. The divers communicated with hand signals, marking their progress as they worked. Mark moved steadily, examining the scattered debris while adjusting his buoyancy to avoid stirring up more silt. Despite the effort, the team felt confident in their ability to complete the operation. Then the mood changed. From the edge of the gloom, a massive shape approached. A tiger shark, close to 12 feet in length, drifted out of the darkness. Drawn by the vibrations of the tools and the unfamiliar activity on the reef, it circled with unsettling intent. The divers froze for a moment, watching as the predator's striped body twisted around them. The first strike came suddenly. The shark lunged forward, jaws clamping onto Mark's leg with crushing force. The pressure tore through the neoprene and blood immediately clouded the water. Mark screamed into his regulator, his body convulsing as bubbles erupted around him. His hands flailed against the predator's mass, but its thrashing dragged him sideways in violent bursts. His partner reacted quickly, jabbing hard with a recovery pole at the shark's flank. The impact startled it only briefly, as the predator twisted again, shaking Mark with terrifying power. Other divers joined in, creating noise by slamming tools against metal and stone as they were desperate to distract the animal. The water churned with chaos, sand rising in clouds, bubbles bursting in all directions. Mark's pain was overwhelming, but he kept struggling, his training pushing him to fight for survival. His leg burned with deep lacerations as the shark continued its assault. For long, agonizing moments, the predator held on, refusing to release. The struggle raged beneath the surface as the predator twisted violently, its powerful tail whipping through the water. Mark's body jolted with every movement, streams of red clouding around him. His teammates did not stop, striking again and again with poles and tools, their bubbles rising fast in the dark water. The noise filled the reef, echoing in bursts that finally began to push the predator away. With a sudden wrench, the jaws opened and the enormous form drifted back into the gloom. Mark floated in shock, his body limp as his leg throbbed with searing pain. The wetsuit around his thigh and calf was shredded, long tears exposing deep wounds. His regulator hissed loudly as his breath came fast and uneven. The closest diver grabbed hold of his harness, signaling to the others that it was time to surface. Together they formed a protective circle, keeping eyes on the shadows below as they slowly ascended through the churning water. The ascent was tense. Every flicker in the haze felt like another approach. Every swirl of sand carried the fear that the predator might return. The divers kept close, their movements careful but steady. When they finally broke the surface, the team shouted for support, alerting the boat above. Within moments, strong arms hauled Mark out of the sea. Blood streamed across the deck as he collapsed, his face pale, but his eyes open. Emergency kits were rushed out and fabric was pressed hard against his injuries to slow the bleeding. The wounds were deep, jagged lacerations running along muscle and skin, but he was alive. His teammates stood over him, drenched and shaking from the encounter, their faces marked by exhaustion and disbelief. The boat sped toward shore, cutting through the waves with urgency as radios called ahead for medical teams. At the harbor, paramedics were waiting, Mark was lifted onto a stretcher, his body trembling as bandages soaked quickly with blood. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where surgeons worked for hours to close the wounds and repair damaged tissue. Despite the severity of his injuries, doctors confirmed that he would survive. His training, his teammates' actions, and the quick response of the rescue crew had saved his life. News of the incident spread quickly across Maui and beyond. Reports highlighted the risks faced by police divers who carried out missions in unpredictable conditions. Experts noted that tiger sharks are highly opportunistic, and underwater operations with tools and vibrations can trigger their curiosity or aggression. Officials reminded diving teams to remain alert and to adapt safety measures whenever working near reefs known for large predators. For Mark, recovery would be a long and difficult process. His leg bore deep scars, and the memory of that morning haunted him even more than the pain. The image of the striped predator, its jaws clamped on his body, remained vivid in his mind. Yet his survival stood as a testament to teamwork and resilience. For his colleagues, the encounter served as a poignant reminder of the risks they faced in their duty and of the fragile line between safety and disaster in the ocean's depths. On February 16, 2024, the reef-studded waters off Queensland shimmered in the morning sun as three friends prepared for a kayaking trip they had been looking forward to for weeks. James Reed, 28, had grown up near the coast and loved exploring the ocean. His adventurous spirit made him the leader of the group, often encouraging others to try new outdoor activities. Beside him was Sophie Turner, 31, who had spent much of her life hiking, swimming, and taking part in community sports. She valued time outdoors as a way to balance her busy professional life. Alex Chen, 26, the youngest of the trio, was a fitness enthusiast who often joined James on cycling routes and water sports. Together, the three shared a bond over their love for exploring nature and testing their limits in new environments. That morning, their kayaks cut smoothly across the calm water, the reef visible beneath them in dazzling shades of blue and green. Fish darted between the corals, the scene peaceful and inviting. The trio paddled side by side, laughing and pointing out the beauty below. Their trip seemed ideal. The ocean was calm, and the shoreline was a safe distance behind them. None of them suspected the danger lurking below, hidden in the shifting light of the water. Without warning, the calm broke. A massive tiger shark, nearly 12 feet long, surged upward from the depths with explosive force. It rammed James's kayak, tilting the vessel violently. Before he could react, the predator's jaws clamped around his right forearm, crushing and tearing through flesh. Blood poured into the sea, painting the clear water red in seconds. James screamed in agony as the kayak rocked, threatening to overturn completely. Sophie and Alex froze for only a moment before springing into action. They paddled hard toward him, slamming their kayaks against the water to create noise and force. Sophie struck the surface with her paddle while Alex angled his kayak to block the predator from circling closer. The shark twisted, its fins slicing through the waves as it returned for another pass. The water foamed with every movement, the kayaks rocking wildly as the trio fought to keep balance in the chaos. For long, terrifying minutes, the predator circled, each shadow below the surface sending fresh waves of panic through them. James clutched the side of his vessel, his arm mangled and bleeding heavily, his strength draining fast. Sophie shouted and slammed her paddle harder while Alex struck the water again and again with his hull. Their frantic efforts finally bought them precious seconds. At last, the tiger shark veered off, fading into the deeper blue. The ocean fell eerily quiet again, leaving only streaks of red and the gasps of three shaken kayakers. But the fight was far from over. James's injury was catastrophic, and survival would now depend on what happened next. The ocean grew calm after the tiger shark slipped back into the deeper blue, but the silence carried a heavy weight. James slumped against the edge of his kayak, his mangled arm bleeding freely into the sea. Sophie and Alex paddled hard toward the nearest strip of shoreline, guiding his vessel while keeping their eyes fixed on the water, fearing the dark shadow might return at any second. Every stroke of the paddles felt slow against the urgency of time slipping away. James's pale face showed the strain of shock and blood loss, his breathing shallow as he clung weakly to the side. The reef that had looked beautiful only moments earlier now felt endless, each wave a reminder of how far they still had to go. Sophie's muscles ached from paddling, yet she forced herself forward, calling to Alex to stay alongside her. They kept their kayaks tight around James, forming a protective shield in case the predator circled back. For long minutes, the only sound was the slap of paddles and James's uneven breaths. The beach drew closer, but his strength faded with every moment. When they reached the shallows, Alex jumped into the surf and dragged James's kayak onto the sand. Sophie followed, rushing to help lift their injured friend onto the shore. The sight of his arm, torn and soaked in red, forced them into frantic action. With no medical supplies, Sophie ripped fabric from her shirt to bind the wound, wrapping it tightly above the bite to slow the flow. Alex pressed down with trembling hands, his body shaking as he tried to keep calm. Their quick actions bought critical minutes, but the bleeding remained severe. Emergency services were alerted by locals who had seen the commotion from the beach. Sirens soon echoed across the coast as paramedics arrived, racing toward the group with stretchers and equipment. James was lifted swiftly, his head lolling as oxygen masks were secured and fluids prepared. Sophie and Alex stood frozen, their bodies coated in salt water and sweat, unable to shake the image of the predator's massive fins slicing through the sea. The ambulance carried James to the nearest hospital, where surgeons worked for hours to close deep wounds and prevent further blood loss. Though he survived, part of his forearm was gone, leaving permanent damage that no amount of skill could restore. Doctors praised the swift response of Sophie and Alex, explaining that without their immediate efforts, James might not have lived long enough to reach medical care. News of the attack spread quickly across Queensland, sparking debate over the risks of kayaking in reef-rich waters where predators often patrol. Experts explain that tiger sharks are opportunistic hunters, frequently targeting splashing brightly colored objects or isolated vessels. They stress the importance of awareness and safety measures in areas known for large predators. For James, the aftermath was both physically and emotionally draining. His body bore the scars of the attack, and the loss of his arm would forever alter his life. Sophie and Alex, though uninjured, carried the heavy memory of those minutes on the water. Their friendship grew stronger, bound by survival, but the sea they once loved now had a shadow that none of them could forget. On March 12, 2025, the sunlit waters off Baja, California shimmered as 29-year-old Ethan Walker steered his jet ski across the open sea. Ethan had always been drawn to adventure. Growing up in Arizona, he spent summers visiting the coast with his family, where he first fell in love with water sports. By his late teens, he had learned to surf, dive, and wakeboard, but jet skiing became his favorite. The speed, spray, and freedom of riding across vast stretches of water gave him a sense of exhilaration, unmatched by anything else. He was also known for his cautious approach, often wearing proper safety gear and keeping a safe distance from nearby boats. That morning, however, the ocean had other plans. The waters near Baja were alive with activity. Schools of tuna darted beneath the surface, chased by larger predators hidden in the depths. Tourists on nearby vessels snapped photos of dolphins and seabirds diving into the waves. Ethan, unaware of the danger gathering below, revved the engine of his jet ski, carving across the swells. Every turn sprayed arcs of white foam, the machine's roar echoing across the water. To him, it was the perfect day to ride. Then, without warning, the calm fractured. A sleek short-fin mako, nearly 12 feet long, surged from below with astonishing speed. It struck the underside of the jet ski with such force that Ethan lost control and was thrown headfirst into the water. The sudden impact left him disoriented, and before he could regain his bearings, the predator lunged. Its powerful jaws clamped onto his left forearm, teeth slicing through neoprene and into flesh. The pain was searing, his scream muffled by seawater as blood spread in a dark cloud around him. Ethan thrashed, kicking hard and reaching for the jet ski that floated nearby. Desperation pushed him to cling to its side, using the hull as a barrier between himself and the predator. The shark circled, its dorsal fin cutting sharp arcs through the surface before it darted forward again. Ethan swung his legs frantically, trying to keep distance, while gripping the slick surface of the craft with his good arm. Every movement felt slower, the water dragging at him as his strength ebbed away. The predator lunged once more, jaws snapping so close that they scraped the side of the jet ski. For tense moments, it pressed the attack, its sleek body twisting with terrifying precision. Ethan's body shook with exhaustion, but he refused to let go. His survival now depended not on speed, but on holding his position until help could reach him. In the distance, a tour boat had spotted the commotion. Its crew leaned forward, pointing at the circling predator and the lone figure fighting for his life. Rescue was racing toward him, but the outcome still teetered in those bloodied waters. The rescue boat closed the distance quickly, its engine cutting across the swells as crew members prepared for urgent action. Ethan clung desperately to the side of his jet ski, his left arm hanging in tatters, the blood spreading wide into the water. The short-fin mako circled a final time, its sleek body rising just beneath the surface as if deciding whether to strike again. Crew members leaned forward, striking the water with poles and tossing flotation rings to distract it. The noise, light, and sudden splashes shifted the predator's focus just long enough for rescuers to maneuver in. With swift precision, they pulled Ethan from the water, his limp body slamming against the deck as multiple hands dragged him clear of the foaming surface. The predator veered once more, jaws snapping at the stern before disappearing back into the depths. The scene on the boat turned immediately frantic. His wetsuit hung shredded at the arm, deep lacerations exposing muscle and tissue. Crew members pressed cloth tightly against the wounds, working to slow the heavy flow. His breathing came in sharp bursts, shock rattling his body as his skin turned pale beneath the sun. The boat sped toward shore, its hull slamming hard against each swell as time pressed down on everyone aboard. One rescuer monitored his pulse, while another wrapped layer after layer of bandages across the torn flesh, replacing each as blood soaked through. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain, but he remained conscious enough to grip the side rails. Each passing moment felt heavy, as though the predator's shadow still lingered beneath them. When they reached land, paramedics were already waiting for them. Ethan was lifted onto a stretcher, and saline drip started as he was rushed into the ambulance. Sirens wailed as he was transported to the nearest hospital, every bump in the road sending tremors of agony through his body. Emergency staff met him at the doors, whisking him into surgery without delay. Surgeons cleaned the ragged edges of the bite, stitching through layers of muscle and repairing torn vessels. Hours passed before his condition was stabilized. The damage was extensive but not fatal. News of the attack spread swiftly across Baja California. Locals who relied on the sea shook their heads with quiet recognition, aware that predators roamed these waters whenever tuna schools gathered near the shore. Tourists, however, were struck by fear, many rethinking excursions planned for the following days. Experts interviewed by media outlets explained that shortfin makos were among the fastest sharks in the world, capable of explosive bursts of speed, and were drawn quickly to splashing or commotion on the surface. They emphasized that Ethan's survival was owed to both his instinct to use the jet ski as a barrier and the rescue boat's immediate response. For Ethan, the aftermath extended beyond his wounds. Weeks of recovery lay ahead, his arm wrapped in heavy dressings, with physiotherapy sessions scheduled to restore movement. He carried deep scars that would remain for life, constant reminders of the day the sea turned violent. The mental weight proved just as heavy, nights filled with flashes of sharp teeth and violent thrashing beneath the waves. His love for the ocean was not erased, but it was forever altered, tempered by the knowledge that beauty and danger often coexist on its surface. On October 14, 2022, the wind swept across the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa, a place renowned worldwide as the center of great white shark tourism. That morning, a group of tourists and professionals gathered for a cage diving expedition, eager to experience the power of these predators up close. Among them was Daniel Fisher, a 35-year-old professional diver from Hamburg, Germany. Daniel had built a career in underwater photography, traveling to the world's oceans to capture rare images of marine life. His work had been published in magazines and featured in documentaries, earning him recognition for his fearless approach and technical skill. Daniel had always been drawn to sharks. From his teenage years, he studied them extensively, fascinated by their biology and misunderstood reputation. His goal was to capture images that showed both their beauty and their danger. For him, Gansbaai was a dream location, offering one of the highest chances of close encounters with great whites. With years of experience in deep-sea diving, coral reef exploration, and wreck diving, Daniel was confident in his ability to work safely, even in the presence of apex predators. That morning, the expedition set out in choppy seas. The crew secured the steel cage, lowering it carefully over the side of the boat. The divers prepared their gear, pulling on wetsuits, checking regulators, and readying cameras. Excitement mixed with nerves as they watched the water churn below. The area had a reputation for unpredictable encounters, but that was exactly what drew people like Daniel to it. Within minutes of the cage being secured, a massive shadow appeared beneath the surface. Rising with a surge of water, a 17-foot great white shark circled the vessel, its dorsal fin sliced through the swell, its body twisting with powerful strokes as it approached the cage. The divers inside felt the thrill of the moment, gripping the bars and pointing their cameras at the scene. Daniel leaned out farther than the others, determined to get a close-up shot of the predator's eyes and teeth. His camera extended beyond the bars, dangling just inches from the open water. Focused on the shot, he distracted himself from the rules designed to keep divers safe. As the great white circled faster, its movements grew sharper, its body brushing close to the cage. Without warning, the predator lunged. Its massive jaws clamped onto Daniel's arm, the force bending steel and splintering metal. The cage shook violently as bubbles and blood burst into the water. Divers inside screamed through their regulators as the structure groaned under the attack. Daniel struggled, thrashing as the shark pulled with crushing strength, dragging him against the bars. Crew members on deck scrambled to raise the cage, ropes straining as the winch groaned. But the predator surged again, striking the cage with its full weight. The impact twisted the bars wider, tearing Daniel from his hold. The great white's force ripped Daniel free of the bars, pulling him downward into the swirling water. The cage swung violently, banging against the hull of the boat as the predator thrashed with its grip, locked tight. The water filled with foam and red clouds that spread quickly, blinding those still inside the cage. Divers pressed against the steel, their eyes wide as the scene unfolded before them in chaos. The shark surged again, dragging its prey deeper with terrifying speed. The crew above shouted warnings and pounded the surface with poles, trying to break the predator's focus. Metal clanged against metal as the winch hauled the cage upward, but the attack continued below. Within moments, Daniel's form was lost in the churn, his body spinning as the shark twisted in brutal arcs. The struggle lasted barely 2 minutes, yet every second seemed to stretch endlessly for those who watched. The predator finally released its grip, vanishing into the gloom with a flick of its massive tail. Daniel floated briefly before sinking beyond reach, the current pulling him away. Silence fell across the boat, broken only by the crash of waves against the hull and the hiss of regulators as the remaining divers surfaced in shock. The cage was pulled back aboard, its bars bent and warped from the force of the assault. Equipment hung twisted, cameras lost to the depths. The deck, usually buzzing with excitement after an encounter, stood frozen in horror. The survivors clutched the railings, their faces pale as they stared at the slick of blood spreading across the waves. Authorities were notified immediately, and patrol vessels were dispatched to search the surrounding area. Divers were ordered out of the water, and the trip was abandoned. Rescue efforts scoured the seas, but nothing more was found. By the time officials confirmed the details, it was clear the diver had not survived. The incident shook the Gansbai community. Cage diving was a major industry, drawing tourists from around the globe. Yet the event revealed the razor-thin line between controlled encounters and the raw danger of wild predators. Experts reviewed the footage and accounts, noting unusually aggressive behavior in the days leading up to the attack. They explained that strong currents, reduced prey, and seasonal changes could all increase risk. Out of respect for the loss, authorities suspended all cage diving tours in the area. Operators faced scrutiny, with questions raised about safety protocols and the positioning of divers. Many pointed to the importance of never leaning outside the bars, a rule designed to prevent exactly what had occurred. Daniel's decision to push for the perfect shot had cost him his life, leaving colleagues and loved ones devastated. For those who had been present, the memory of the steel bending, the screams beneath the surface, and the blood in the water would never fade. The ocean had claimed another life, reminding everyone that in the territory of the Great White, even the strongest cage could not guarantee safety. On January 22, 2025, the fjords near Tromsø shimmered under pale winter light as a 60-foot yacht cut through the icy waters. Aboard were 5 passengers, including Thomas Harding, his family, and their friend Lars Jensen, a 29-year-old Norwegian who had grown up near these same rugged coasts. Lars was no stranger to the sea. As a child, he had spent countless days fishing with his father, learning to read the shifts of current and wind. Later, he pursued studies in marine biology before settling into work as a coastal guide, introducing visitors to the wildlife of Norway's cold northern waters. For him, the yacht trip was more than a leisure outing. It was a familiar connection to the natural world he admired deeply. The Harding family, by contrast, had come seeking adventure far from their home. They had chartered the vessel to experience the fjords, renowned for their snow-covered cliffs and abundant marine life. The boat offered a sense of safety, its steel frame and polished deck sturdy against the dark water below. The passengers moved between cameras and binoculars, hoping to catch a glimpse of seals or whales surfacing in the distance. Their laughter carried over the cold breeze, mixing with the quiet churn of the yacht's engines. The sea was calm, but that calm masked the raw force of nature beneath. Pods of orcas often patrolled these waters during winter, hunting herring that gathered in massive shoals. Their presence was not unusual, but encounters this close to a small yacht always carried risk. None of the passengers expected danger as the black and white shapes appeared on the horizon, their dorsal fins slicing the surface like knives through glass. The pod drew nearer, sleek bodies rising and falling in rhythm. At first, it was breathtaking, a display of power and beauty few ever witnessed so closely. Lars leaned over the railing, eager to capture a better view of the largest orca in the group. Its immense frame glided just beneath the yacht, its pale patch flashing as it rolled beneath the hull. Then, without warning, it breached. The strike came with violent force. The orca's body collided against the side of the yacht, sending a shock through the vessel. Lars lost his balance, pitched forward, and crashed into the freezing water below. The impact knocked the air from his chest, and icy cold gripped him instantly. Before he could orient himself, the predator surged again. Massive jaws closed around his side, pulling him under with terrifying strength. For seconds, that felt eternal. Chaos exploded across the deck. Passengers screamed and scrambled, reaching for ropes and shouting for help. Thomas Harding grabbed for a line while others pounded the hull in panic. Below, the dark water roiled as Lars thrashed in the grip of the giant predator, his body twisting violently as he tried to break free. The sea that had seemed calm moments before now erupted with foam, shadows, and the brutal clash of man against beast. The orca released him as suddenly as it had struck, leaving Lars gasping and disoriented in the freezing sea. The crew scrambled to haul him back aboard, his body soaked, trembling, and on the edge of hypothermia. But the danger was not yet over. The pod circled still, their towering fins cutting arcs around the battered yacht. Lars lay sprawled on the yacht's deck, shivering uncontrollably as cold water poured from his clothes. His skin was pale and his breath came in shallow bursts as crew members wrapped him in thick blankets. The freezing grip of the sea had sapped his strength, leaving him barely able to move. Around him, the rest of the passengers stood in stunned silence, eyes fixed on the circling pod that still shadowed the vessel. The towering fins cut arcs around the boat, a reminder that the threat had not fully passed. The yacht rocked under the lingering weight of the encounter. Each swell seemed sharper, each ripple carrying tension as the passengers clung to railings and braced themselves. The orcas lingered for long minutes, their sleek bodies rising and disappearing in the dark water. Though they made no further strikes, the sense of danger was overwhelming. The passengers watched in silence, their fear amplified by the eerie patience of the pod. It was as if the predators were reminding the humans whose world they had entered. At last, the orcas drifted away, sliding into the depths as smoothly as they had arrived. Relief washed over the yacht, but the silence remained heavy. The vessel's crew rushed to regain control, checking the hull for damage and ensuring the engines were steady. Meanwhile, Lars was given hot drinks and more blankets, his trembling body slowly regaining warmth. His eyes stayed wide and distant, haunted by the memory of immense jaws and cold water dragging him below. By the time the yacht returned to shore, word of the incident had already spread through the nearby harbor. Locals and fellow travelers gathered at the pier, murmuring in disbelief as the battered passenger stepped onto land. Medical teams met them quickly, escorting Lars to a nearby clinic where his body temperature was stabilized. His injuries were limited to bruising and deep scratches, but the shock of near drowning in icy waters left a far deeper mark. Experts later explained that orcas are powerful hunters, often curious but capable of sudden aggression when boats cross their feeding routes. The incident reminded everyone that the fjords, though breathtaking, are also wild and unpredictable. Guides and officials urged visitors to exercise greater caution, emphasizing that even close observations from sturdy vessels carried risk. For those aboard that yacht, the memory became permanent. The Hardings and Lars carried with them the image of black and white giants rising from the depths, and the realization of how quickly calm seas could turn hostile. The trip meant to celebrate beauty ended as a stark lesson in survival, leaving behind both gratitude for rescue and awe at the raw force of nature. On the morning of September 3, 2025, the sun rose over the Gulf of Mexico in a blazing sweep of orange and gold, casting a shimmering reflection across the churning waters that stretched endlessly in every direction. Offshore, a modest oil platform jutted from the sea, its steel supports creaking faintly under the constant motion of the waves. Workers moved along the narrow catwalks, performing routine inspections and maintenance, unaware that the calm early hours would soon be shattered by raw, predatory violence. Among them was 31-year-old Javier Moreno, a seasoned rig hand with over a decade of experience, his hands calloused from years of handling cables, valves, and heavy machinery. Leaning over the edge to check a sensor beneath the platform, he squinted at the green-gray depths below, noting the occasional glint of fish moving in the sun-dappled water, completely unaware of the enormous shadow slipping silently through the waves nearby. The first warning was subtle but unmistakable to those attuned to the sea. A series of abrupt splashes, ripples that didn't match the natural motion of the water, drew the attention of nearby workers who exchanged cautious glances. Then came the unmistakable shape, a massive 13-foot tiger shark, its striped gray body cutting through the water with predatory precision, drawn by the commotion of discarded bait from fishing boats and the rhythmic slap of tools against steel. It moved with silent intent beneath the surface, eyes fixed, muscles coiling like a tightly wound spring, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The calm morning, with its warmth and routine, seemed suddenly alien, the sunlit waves turning into a stage for imminent chaos. Within seconds, the predator struck. Its head surged upward with astonishing speed, jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth designed to cut through flesh and bone alike. Javier, still bent over the edge, barely had time to register the movement before the shark rammed him forcefully, its massive bulk slamming against his legs with bone-jarring force. Pain shot up his right leg, a hot, sharp agony that stole his breath, and the right hand cried out silently. Unable to voice his terror over the roar of crashing water and the startled shouts of his coworkers, the shark clamped its jaws around him, thrashing violently, dragging him toward the water with a terrifying power that seemed to disregard his weight and the steel grating beneath his feet. The initial shock left him disoriented, his senses flooded with pain, adrenaline, and disbelief, every instinct screaming that this was life-threatening, that the predator would not relent. Workers scrambled instantly, their training kicking in as they grabbed ropes, poles, and hooks, lashing at the shark in desperate attempts to protect their colleague. Shouts of warning and commands collided with the splashing water, creating a cacophony of fear and urgency. One man swung a long metal pole, striking the shark's head in hopes of forcing it to release its grip, while another threw a thick rope toward Javier, trying to pull him back to safety. The water churned violently, foamy and red as the shark thrashed, unwilling to surrender its hold. Protective gear offered only limited resistance. Torn gloves, ripped boots, and shredded pants were evidence of the immense strength and ferocity of the predator. The scene was a maelstrom of panic, violence, and survival instinct, the confined space of the platform amplifying every movement, every splash, every desperate attempt to intervene. After what seemed like an eternity but was only seconds, the shark released Javier, who collapsed against the steel grating, drenched in blood and trembling from the combination of pain and shock. Co-workers hauled him carefully toward the platform's central deck, securing him with makeshift harnesses to prevent him from sliding further or accidentally falling overboard. Despite the severity of his injuries, he remained conscious, his breathing ragged, heart hammering, eyes wide with disbelief at the rapid escalation from ordinary workday to life-threatening encounter. The shark circled once more in the nearby water, massive tail slicing through the surface, before retreating into deeper water with a grace and power that underscored its role as apex predator, leaving a trail of disturbed water and shaken humans in its wake. Emergency protocols were enacted immediately. Radio calls transmitted Javier's condition to nearby medical teams and the Coast Guard, while fellow rig workers began basic first aid, applying pressure to lacerations and attempting to control the heavy bleeding that had soaked through his clothing. The metallic smell of blood mingled with the acrid scent of diesel and salt, a poignant reminder of the unnatural collision between human industrial presence and wild nature in a single moment of chaos. Onlookers from neighboring rigs and passing vessels watched with tense concern, instinctively understanding the deadly potential of a tiger shark when provoked or presented with an opportunity. Authorities later reviewed the incident, emphasizing the bold and opportunistic nature of tiger sharks, particularly near offshore structures where human activity, discarded bait, and splashing can provoke sudden violent encounters. Experts noted that while sharks often avoid humans, the combination of curiosity, hunger, and provocation can result in precisely the type of attack witnessed that morning, where a seasoned worker's familiarity with the sea offered little protection against the raw, overwhelming power of a 13-foot predator. Javier's survival was attributed to the immediate response of his colleagues, quick thinking under pressure, and the partial intervention of the platform structure itself, which limited the shark's mobility compared to open water conditions. The aftermath left a lasting impression on everyone involved. Workers returned to their tasks later in the day with heightened caution, glances cast repeatedly toward the water, wary of shadows and movement beneath the surface. Javier, stabilized and transported to a hospital on shore, required multiple surgeries to repair deep lacerations and torn muscles, but he survived, his resilience remarkable given the severity of the encounter. Tales of the incident spread quickly throughout the Gulf's offshore community. a sobering reminder that even routine workdays could be shattered in an instant by forces beyond human control. By evening, the oil platform, still creaking gently with the rhythm of the sea, had returned to a tentative calm. Waves lapped against the steel legs with deceptive serenity, the sun's reflection glittering off the surface, masking the danger that had lurked moments before. Workers spoke in hushed tones, respect and fear interwoven in every glance toward the water, while emergency teams reviewed protocols, reaffirming the lessons learned the hard way. The tiger shark had vanished into the depths, leaving behind only a story of terror, bravery, and survival, an enduring testament to the unpredictable power of the ocean's apex predators, and the thin line that separates safety from catastrophe in the harsh, unforgiving expanse of open water. On the morning of July 22, 2024, the sun rose brightly over the Algarve coast in Portugal, casting sparkling reflections across the turquoise waves that lapped gently against the golden beaches. The air carried the familiar warmth of midsummer, tinged with salt and the faint scent of sunscreen as tourists and locals began their day along the shoreline. 23-year-old Marco Silva, a thrill-seeker known among his friends for his daring stunts and fearless approach to the sea, balanced atop a sleek, compact kneeboard, scanning the swell for the perfect wave to execute spins and tricks. He had spent the early hours riding small sets, diving into tight turns and carving arcs through the surf, drawing cheers from friends gathered on shore who recorded his maneuvers on their phones, unaware of the looming threat beneath the seemingly serene surface. The first warning came as a subtle distortion beneath the board, a dark shadow moving with unnatural speed and precision against the sunlit backdrop of the sandy seafloor. Marco's instincts alerted him, a flicker of unease passing through his focus. But before he could adjust, the shadow surged upward with explosive force. A 12-foot short-fin mako, drawn by the rapid splashes and erratic movement, rammed the board violently, the impact jolting Marco from his position and sending him tumbling into the churning water. The board flipped in the swell, rolling with him as salt water stung his eyes, and a pulse of adrenaline shot through his chest, igniting fear and survival instinct in equal measure. The mako circled immediately, its streamlined body cutting through the water with frightening agility, jaws snapping repeatedly near Marco's legs and arms. The neoprene of his suit offered little protection. Deep gashes formed along his calf as teeth grazed and tore at the material, blood mixing with the salt water, staining the pale green-blue of the waves. Foam erupted with every thrash of the shark's tail, sending sprays across Marco's face, mingling with the stinging seawater as he kicked and splashed furiously, attempting to keep the board between himself and the predator while forcing himself to remain upright. Each movement had to be deliberate yet frantic, the balance of controlled motion and raw panic dictating whether he would survive the next few critical seconds. Friends on shore shouted encouragement, their voices carried faintly across the water as Marco struggled to regain control. He rotated his body instinctively, presenting the board as a shield while scanning for the shark's next movement. The predator lunged with startling speed, striking at the floating board and sending Marco spinning sideways. Still, he managed to kick off its momentum, propelling himself away just enough to avoid a direct bite. The combination of shock, pain, and fear made every second feel drawn out, an endless stretch of adrenaline-fueled terror in which the simplest misstep could result in catastrophe. For tense minutes, the mako circled relentlessly, probing the young man with sharp, probing bites and sudden bursts of speed, each strike accompanied by frothy eruptions of seawater. Marco's limbs ached from constant movement, his calf pulsing with pain from the deep gashes, yet he forced himself to continue paddling, balancing the urgency of escape with the knowledge that any panicked or erratic motion could trigger another strike. The water roiled around him, waves tossed by the shark's movement, creating chaos that made judging distance or speed nearly impossible. Each breath was a struggle, the salt water mingling with blood and adrenaline as the fight between predator and prey unfolded in a deadly rhythm, the ocean a stage for raw, unrelenting power. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, but measured only in those critical minutes, the shark retreated, slipping beneath the waves with a sleek, fluid motion, leaving only disturbed water and the faint sheen of blood on the surface as evidence of its presence. Marco's body trembled violently from exertion and shock, muscles burning, heart hammering, lungs gasping as he clung to the board. Finally able to stabilize himself in the calmer water beyond the shark's reach, his friends paddled out quickly, reaching him with additional flotation devices and guiding him back toward the shore, where sun-warmed sand and safety awaited, a stark contrast to the icy, violent chaos of the open water behind him. Emergency medical personnel were waiting as Marco collapsed on the sand, the gashes on his calf deep and bloody, bruising along his arms from repeated contact with the board and the shark's teeth, the shock of the encounter leaving him pale and trembling. He required immediate medical attention, the severity of the lacerations necessitating cleaning, sutures, and close monitoring for infection. Yet his survival was remarkable given the ferocity of the attack and the predator's relentless behavior. Friends and bystanders hovered close, awe and fear etched into their faces, speaking in hushed tones, some recounting every detail they had observed, others simply staring at the blood-streaked water with disbelief. Authorities later noted that shortfin makos are highly aggressive, fast, and opportunistic predators, particularly in areas with active splashing or unusual movements that mimic the behavior of their prey. Experts emphasized that encounters near populated surf zones, while rare, could escalate quickly due to the shark's speed, power, and acute predatory instincts. Marco's quick thinking, use of the board as a defensive tool, and immediate assistance from friends likely prevented the encounter from ending in tragedy, underscoring the narrow margin between survival and disaster when humans intersect with apex predators in their natural environment. The incident left a lasting impression on everyone involved. The Algarve coast, usually celebrated for its warm waves and safe recreational conditions, had revealed its unpredictable danger, a reminder that beneath the inviting turquoise surface lurked creatures capable of immense power and lethal precision. Marco, once eager to perform increasingly daring stunts, approached the sea with newfound caution, each wave a reminder of the morning when a single moment of misjudgment had brought him face to face with one of nature's fastest predators. By evening, the waters had returned to their familiar rhythm, waves lapping gently against the sunlit beaches, as surfers rode the same swells that had hours before hosted a life-and-death struggle. Yet for Marco and those who witnessed the attack, the memory lingered vividly. The chaos of splashing water, the flash of teeth beneath the surface, the raw power of the predator that had tested him in its domain. The short-fin mako had vanished into deeper water, leaving behind only a shaken young man, the blood in the waves, and an enduring reminder that even in a place celebrated for leisure and adventure, nature's apex predators demand respect, vigilance, and humility from all who enter their world. On the morning of October 5, 2024, the waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, were unusually calm, the early sun casting a silvery glow across the undulating surface, while the faint swell carried the salty scent of the Atlantic far inland. A group of 4 experienced divers, all in their late 20s and accustomed to challenging underwater environments, descended from their small dive boat, eager to explore the centuries-old shipwreck that lay just beneath the waves. Among them was 29-year-old Liam Coetzee, a seasoned diver and underwater videographer, whose life had been devoted to capturing marine environments with meticulous precision. The group swam cautiously toward the wreck, their fins slicing through the water, bubbles trailing from regulators in neat streams, the shadowy hull of the vessel looming ahead like a ghostly reminder of history submerged beneath the ocean. The morning began with routine fascination. The divers swam over twisted metal beams and encrusted wooden planks, noting the remnants of cargo and the intricate colonization of the wreck by coral and fish. Liam maneuvered carefully, camera in hand, capturing slow, deliberate shots of the eerie underwater scene. The light filtering through the water created an almost ethereal glow, illuminating jagged edges and silt clouds that had settled over centuries. All seemed calm, the divers absorbed in their exploration, when an unnatural stillness in the surrounding water hinted at the presence of something far larger, far more dangerous than the scattered fish and curious seals occasionally brushing past. Suddenly, from the shadows of the hull, a massive 16-foot great white surged forward with astonishing speed and precision. Its sleek gray body moved like a torpedo, muscles coiling beneath the skin in explosive motion. Liam, the closest to the predator, felt a violent impact as the shark slammed into his thigh, tearing through the neoprene of his wetsuit and sending a searing pain up his leg. Instinctively, he kicked and twisted, but the predator's strength was overwhelming, its jaws clamping with terrifying force as chaos erupted around him. Air bubbles surged upward in frantic streams, disturbing the silt and clouding visibility, and the twisted wreck became a maze of sudden panic and turbulence. The other divers reacted instantly, adrenaline surging as they tried to protect themselves and assist their companion. One attempted to fend off the shark with a spear, thrusting repeatedly, though the predator's speed and agility made each attempt only partially effective. Another diver tried to grab Liam and pull him backward, but the powerful currents created by the shark's movement and the surge of displaced water hindered progress. At the same time, the fourth struggled to recover a camera that had been ripped from his hands in the chaos. Visibility dropped to near zero as debris, silt, and bubbles filled the water, each movement amplified by fear and urgency. The once serene exploration transformed into a maelstrom of survival instinct. For tense minutes that stretched like hours, the great white circled, lunging repeatedly, snapping its jaws near the diver's arms and legs, testing them with its raw, predatory power. Liam fought to stay upright, legs kicking and arms swinging, using his camera and equipment as makeshift shields, while the force of each strike reverberated through his body. Pain seared through his thigh, every pulse a reminder of the shark's grip and the dangerous unpredictability of their environment. The other divers coordinated as best they could, sending signals and motions that were frantic and improvised, pushing and thrusting to distract the predator while keeping themselves out of the most direct line of attack. The wreck, once a site of historical curiosity, now served as both obstacle and partial protection, beams and planks slowing the shark's approach only slightly. The predator's persistence making every second a desperate battle against instinct and raw power. Finally, after what seemed an eternity but was measured only in those critical, heart-stopping minutes, the great white retreated, vanishing into the murky depths as swiftly and silently as it had appeared. The water slowly cleared, leaving Liam and his team gasping, limbs trembling, faces pale, and equipment floating loosely around them, some torn, some scratched, all bearing witness to the ferocity of the encounter. Liam's thigh was severely lacerated, bruising marking the path of the shark's body as it had struck and twisted. Still, he remained conscious, supported by his companions as they slowly and cautiously made their ascent to the surface. Each fin stroke toward the waiting dive boat was measured yet urgent, every glance over a shoulder betraying the lingering fear that the predator might still lurk nearby. Once aboard, the team collapsed on the deck, removing masks and regulators, gasping in relief at reaching the open air. The crew attended to Liam immediately, applying pressure to the deep gashes and preparing him for transport to a medical facility for surgery and wound care. Adrenaline still coursed through their veins, yet shock and exhaustion quickly followed, leaving the divers pale and shaken. The equipment was inspected, cameras damaged or lost, fins and regulators scarred, all reminders of the violent encounter and the thin line between routine exploration and mortal danger in waters frequented by apex predators. Authorities later issued a warning, emphasizing that shipwrecks off Gansbai often attract aggressive great whites, drawn by the concentration of fish, currents, and human activity. Experts noted that even experienced divers, aware of general shark behavior, can find themselves vulnerable when encountering mature, bold individuals that interpret movement as potential prey. The combination of proximity to the wreck, low visibility, and the predator's natural hunting instincts can rapidly escalate routine dives into life-threatening encounters, highlighting the need for caution, vigilance, and rapid response protocols during underwater exploration. The incident left a lasting impression on the divers. Their routine exploration transformed into a vivid lesson in humility and respect for the ocean's most powerful inhabitants. Liam, despite severe lacerations and bruising, survived, his experience a testament to quick reflexes, calm under extreme pressure, and the support of skilled companions. Yet even after recovery, the memory of those critical minutes remained indelible. The surge of water, the impact of the jaws, the clouding silt, the frantic coordination, and the sudden disappearance of the predator into the depths. Every subsequent dive would carry a heightened awareness, a quiet reverence for the raw, unpredictable power that lay beneath the surface. By late afternoon, the waters off Gansbai appeared calm once more, the sun slanting low across the ocean, waves glinting harmlessly in the golden light. Tourists and divers continued to explore the area, unaware of the morning's dramatic encounter. Yet, for Liam and his team, every shadow beneath the surface, every flicker of movement, would forever be measured against the memory of the great white that had turned a day of adventure into an unforgettable, terrifying brush with nature's apex predator. The shipwreck remained silent and ancient, its twisted hull a poignant reminder of history, human endeavor, and the lurking dangers that the ocean harbors with quiet, unrelenting authority. The remote coral formations off the coast of Palawan, Philippines, had remained largely unexplored by commercial diving operations as of September 2024. These pristine reefs, located nearly 40 kilometers from the nearest fishing village, harbored some of the most diverse marine ecosystems in Southeast Asia. The area's isolation meant that large predators still patrolled these waters with minimal human interference, creating an environment where ancient hunting patterns remained undisturbed. Ramon del Rosario, a 33-year-old spearfishing guide from Manila, had built his reputation on accessing fishing grounds that other guides considered too remote or dangerous. His clients paid premium rates for the opportunity to hunt in waters where massive groupers and other trophy fish remained abundant. Del Rosario's expertise in nighttime spearfishing set him apart from conventional guides, as he understood that certain species became more accessible under the cover of darkness. The expedition that brought Del Rosario to these waters involved a wealthy businessman seeking to land a record-sized grouper. The client had specifically requested a midnight dive, having researched reports that suggested the largest specimens emerged from deep reef caves only during nighttime hours. Del Rosario had agreed to the unusual timing, despite his general preference for dawn hunting sessions. Del Rosario descended alone into the inky water at approximately 11:47 p.m., carrying only a high-powered dive light, his custom spear gun, and 40 minutes of air supply. His strategy involved locating the deep reef caves where large groupers typically sheltered, then using his light to disorient the fish long enough to achieve a clean kill shot. The technique required exceptional diving skills and intimate knowledge of fish behavior patterns. The water temperature at 30 feet depth measured 28 degrees Celsius, with virtually no current and unlimited visibility within his light beam's range. Del Rosario had identified a promising cave formation during his afternoon reconnaissance dive, noting signs of large fish activity, including disturbed sediment and territorial markings on the coral surfaces. 43 minutes into his dive, Del Rosario located his target. A massive Queensland grouper, weighing an estimated 120 pounds, hovered motionless near the cave entrance. The fish appeared unaware of his presence as he maneuvered into position for the killing shot. Del Rosario steadied his breathing and aligned his spear gun's sight with the grouper's vital area behind the gills. The spear struck perfectly, penetrating deep into the fish's body cavity. The wounded grouper immediately began its death throes, thrashing violently while blood dispersed through the water column. Del Rosario secured his catch line and began the process of subduing the massive fish, a procedure that typically required several minutes of careful handling to prevent equipment damage or injury. The hammerhead shark detected the disturbance from approximately 200 meters away. The 10-foot predator had been patrolling the reef's outer edge when Del Rosario's dive light and the grouper's death struggle triggered its hunting instincts. Hammerheads possessed exceptional sensory capabilities in low-light conditions, and the combination of electromagnetic signatures from the dive equipment and chemical traces from the wounded fish created an irresistible stimulus. Del Rosario was focused entirely on securing his catch when the shark's distinctive silhouette entered his light beam. The hammerhead's bizarre head structure, with eyes positioned at the extreme ends of its flattened skull, gave it an almost alien appearance in the artificial illumination. The predator approached with the confident movements of an apex hunter that had encountered no significant threats in these waters. The attack occurred without warning as Del Rosario attempted to swim toward the surface with his prize. The hammerhead struck from his blind spot, its jaws clamping around his shoulder and the upper portion of his diving vest. The impact knocked Del Rosario sideways into the coral formation, his dive light spinning wildly and creating disorienting flashes of illumination. The shark's teeth, though smaller than those of other species, proved devastatingly effective at penetrating diving equipment. Del Rosario felt his vest's inflation system rupture as the hammerhead shook him violently from side to side. His spear gun was torn from his grasp along with the prize grouper that had attracted the predator initially. Del Rosario fought back using the only weapons available, his dive knife and his remaining physical strength. He managed to strike the shark multiple times across its sensitive snout area, while simultaneously kicking against the coral to prevent being dragged into deeper water. The hammerhead's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Del Rosario to break free from its jaws. However, the predator's hunting instincts remained fully engaged. The hammerhead circled repeatedly in the narrow confines of the reef formation, its movements becoming increasingly agitated as it attempted to relocate its escaped prey. Del Rosario's dive light, still functioning despite the attack, created moving shadows that seemed to confuse the shark's navigation systems. After nearly 3 minutes of cat-and-mouse maneuvering through the coral maze, the hammerhead finally retreated into the open water beyond the reef. Del Rosario surfaced immediately, his emergency whistle creating piercing signals that carried across the calm night air. His support boat crew, who had been monitoring his dive schedule, reached his position within 8 minutes. Del Rosario survived the encounter with severe lacerations to his shoulder and upper arm, requiring immediate evacuation to a hospital in Puerto Princesa. Local authorities later confirmed multiple hammerhead sightings in the area throughout September 2019, suggesting that seasonal feeding patterns had drawn these normally deep-water predators into shallower reef environments. The incident effectively ended Del Rosario's career as a spearfishing guide, though he recovered fully from his injuries. He subsequently established a diving safety training program emphasizing the unique risks associated with nighttime spearfishing in predator-rich waters. The attack remains one of the few documented hammerhead encounters with recreational divers in Philippine waters. At sunrise on August 10, 2025, the waves along Gansbai glimmered gold as 8 surfers paddled into the swells near Shark Alley. Among them were Daniel Meyer, 22, and his older brother Luke, 25. Both raised along the South African coast where saltwater and surfboards had shaped much of their youth. Their bond was built on shared dawn sessions, where they competed playfully, yet always looked out for one another. Visiting with them that morning was Claire Holden, a 27-year-old traveler from Australia, known among her friends for chasing surf breaks in distant countries. She had flown halfway across the world for the thrill of riding waves in one of the most famous yet notorious surf zones on Earth. Another member of the lineup was Peter Van Dyck, a local waterman whose routine dawn patrols reflected years of familiarity with the currents and reefs. Together with 4 others, they formed a loose circle, boards bobbing as they waited for the next clean set to rise. The ocean seemed peaceful, though its history carried warnings. Swells rolled steadily, the air crisp, and the surfers paddled deeper, chasing the calm rhythm of the sea. Yet beneath them, baitfish darted in schools, flashing silver in the dim light. Their frantic movements carried signals through the water, drawing the attention of something far larger. For 10 minutes, the surfers moved freely, unaware of the massive shape gliding closer from below, its shadow concealed by the shifting waves above. Without warning, the water detonated in violence. A huge, great white shark erupted beneath Luke's board, its jaws smashing the fiberglass in two. The explosion of foam and spray sent him sprawling as the predator dragged him under in a single pull. The sea around him turned red in an instant, the sight freezing every surfer in shock. Daniel reacted instantly, paddling hard toward his brother, but the predator surged again, its massive head swinging sideways. Teeth raked across Daniel's thigh, tearing flesh and unleashing a torrent of blood into the surf. His board spun out as he clutched his wound, his cries lost beneath the roar of waves and panic. Claire, caught just meters away, felt the current shift as the predator veered toward her. In seconds, its teeth sank into her arm, thrashing her body violently before it released. She screamed, her board flipping as blood stained the water around her. Panic erupted across the lineup, boards scattering as Peter was struck next. The predator slammed into him with brutal force, knocking him clean off his board. Foam, screams, and crimson streaks filled the lineup. The surfers clawed at their boards, striking the water, desperate to fend off the predator that circled with terrifying precision. The once orderly group had been shattered in moments, trapped in a nightmare as the massive great white pressed its assault. The water around the shattered lineup foamed with blood and debris as the surfers struggled against both panic and pain. Boards were scattered and screams carried over the surf, while the predator circled with terrifying patience. Just beyond the chaos, lifeguards stationed on jet skis reacted instantly, racing into the red-streaked zone where the surfers were trapped. Engines roared as they weaved between floating boards, pulling the first wounded onto sled platforms. Every second stretched thin as the predator made another wide arc, its dorsal fin cutting across the surface like a knife through glass. Daniel, clutching his torn thigh, was dragged toward one of the sleds, his strength failing as blood gushed freely into the waves. Luke, still missing beneath the surface, suddenly broke through, thrashing with one arm as the other hung limp. Foam and crimson swirled around him until rescuers pulled him aboard, his body trembling uncontrollably. Claire, half submerged and shaking, was hauled up next, her arm mangled and dripping red across the boards. Nearby, Peter surfaced, gasping, his face pale with shock, his board gone. His body was hoisted by another lifeguard who braced him tightly as the jet ski roared back toward shore. The predator made 2 more passes before retreating into the deep, its shape vanishing beneath the churned water. In under 4 minutes, the lineup had been destroyed, leaving broken boards and streaks of crimson as grim reminders of the assault. The beach, once filled with quiet watchers, erupted into urgency as the wounded were rushed onto the sand. Paramedics waiting on shore worked feverishly, wrapping tourniquets and applying bandages to the gaping wounds. Daniel's thigh was tied tight to slow the bleeding, while Luke's limp arm was secured to prevent further damage. Claire's shredded limb was wrapped in layer after layer of soaked gauze, her body trembling from shock. Peter, though less injured, shook uncontrollably as he clung to rescuers, unable to process what had just unfolded. Ambulances sped toward the nearest medical facility, their sirens wailing as locals and tourists alike stood frozen in disbelief. Boards floated back with the tide, some broken in half, others streaked with red, silent evidence of how quickly a calm morning had collapsed into horror. At the hospital, surgeons worked through the day and into the night, stitching deep wounds, repairing torn tissue, and transfusing blood to replace what had been lost. The brothers endured hours of surgery, one to repair a crushed leg, and the other to save the use of an arm. Claire's recovery involved delicate work to salvage muscle, while Peter required treatment for punctures and trauma. News of the attack spread worldwide, shaking surf communities and drawing sharp warnings from marine experts. They explained that multiple splashes, baitfish movement, and clustered surfers in predator-rich waters created a scenario that invited sudden strikes. Locals acknowledged that Shark Alley had always been known for its dangers, but few had seen an attack unfold with such speed and ferocity against an entire group. In the weeks that followed, recovery was slow and filled with uncertainty. The scars were not only physical, but deeply emotional. Boards, once symbols of freedom and adventure, now stood broken, stored away as reminders of the day when survival hung by seconds. For the survivors, the ocean that had given them joy now carried a shadow of terror, a memory that would remain etched in every wave. On November 11, 2019, the clear waters of Gansby shimmered beneath the morning sun as tourists gathered for an adventure they had long dreamed about. Among them was 34-year-old Emily Saunders, a British traveler who had long carried a fascination for the sea. Raised in Brighton, she had grown up along the southern coast of England, often walking the pier with her family and watching the restless tides roll in. Over time, her curiosity for marine life grew into a passion, leading her to study biology at university and later pursue a career in wildlife photography. Her work took her across Europe and Asia, where she documented species in forests, mountains, and coral reefs. Yet one goal had always stood out: to see great white sharks in their natural environment. The cage dive in South Africa promised to fulfill that dream. Emily had arrived in Gansby a few days earlier, carrying cameras and waterproof gear that had been carefully packed for the occasion. She joined a small group of tourists on a charter boat designed for cage diving, each participant eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary predators known to dominate these waters. Guides gave safety instructions, explaining how the steel cage acted as a barrier between humans and sharks. For Emily, the idea of being so close to an apex predator was thrilling, a chance to capture rare photographs that could inspire others to appreciate the power of the ocean. She smiled as the boat cut through the swells, scanning the horizon for fins. The water that morning was cool and calm, the perfect setting for the dive. Crew members secured the heavy cage to the side of the vessel and lowered it into the sea. One by one, the tourists descended into the enclosure, masks fitted and cameras ready. When it was Emily's turn, she climbed down the ladder with steady hands, her heart racing as she submerged into the blue. From inside, she leaned forward, pressing her camera against the bars to capture passing shapes below. Silver fish darted across the frame, but her eyes stayed fixed on the deeper shadows where something larger might appear. Suddenly, movement stirred in the gloom. Out of the depths, a massive great white shark, nearly 16 feet in length, surged upward with astonishing speed. Its immense body struck the cage with such force that the steel bars rattled violently. The impact echoed like thunder, and before anyone could react, the predator twisted its head and drove forward again. In one terrifying moment, its jaws pushed through the bent bars and clamped onto Emily's shoulder and torso. Her camera fell into the water as her body was jerked sideways against the steel, blood clouding around her. Crew on deck shouted and moved instantly, hurling chum buckets to distract the animal and striking at it with poles. Yet the predator's strength was overwhelming. It shook the cage, pulling her partially through the bent opening. thrashing with relentless power. Other divers inside recoiled in horror, pressing themselves against the far wall of the enclosure as the water filled with turbulence and foam. Seconds stretched into a nightmare, every moment defined by the sound of grinding metal and the violent surge of the sea. Above, the deck was chaos. Guides fought to break free from the water, desperate to force the shark to release its grip. Tourists screamed from the rails, frozen as they watched the predator tear into the cage with unstoppable might. The once calm excursion had transformed into a scene of horror, the very safety structure designed to protect now failing under the force of one of the ocean's most feared predators. The attack had only just begun, but the fate of Emily Saunders hung in the balance of survival as the predator thrashed around her, its shadow blotting out the light. The predator thrashed with brutal force, dragging Emily against the twisted frame as the cage groaned under the strain. The crew above fought desperately, striking the water and jamming poles between the steel bars, but the jaws of the great white did not loosen. Each violent pull spread red through the current, clouding visibility for everyone in the enclosure. For a brief instant, the predator released, only to surge again, its immense body colliding with the structure until a section bent outward like soft metal. Emily's body was torn partially into open water, and within seconds her movements ceased as the shark shook her with merciless power. Panic seized the boat. Tourists clutched the rails, their faces pale, some unable to look while others stared in horror. The guides shouted and threw flares into the sea, the bright bursts forcing the animal to retreat momentarily. With a final thrash, the predator slipped into the gloom, leaving behind a churn of bubbles, blood, and silence. Emily's camera floated to the surface, cracked and useless, a haunting symbol of what had just occurred. The other divers scrambled up the ladder as fast as they could, hands trembling as they reached the deck. They collapsed in shock, ripping off masks and gasping for breath, their eyes wide with disbelief at how quickly safety had failed. On deck, crew members moved in frantic unison, scanning the water for any sign of her. Nets were thrown, spotlights swept the waves, and radios crackled with distress calls to coastal authorities. The sea, moments before calm, now looked hostile and endless. For over an hour, the vessel remained on site, joined by rescue craft that searched every direction. Divers lowered into the water with extreme caution, but only fragments of the steel cage and torn neoprene were found drifting near the surface. The ocean had claimed Emily completely, giving no closure to those who had stood only feet away when it happened. When the boat returned to port, silence hung over the group. News spread instantly through the community, drawing locals and journalists to the pier. Many stared as survivors disembarked, their faces etched with shock. Emergency responders guided them into waiting vehicles for medical checks, but most were uninjured physically. Their trauma lay deeper, replaying the sound of bending steel and the image of the predator's massive head forcing its way through bars that were supposed to protect. Interviews taken later revealed the disbelief that something designed as safe had become a trap, offering no escape when the animal struck with its full strength. Experts soon analyzed the event, pointing out that great whites in this region are among the largest and most powerful in the world. They explained how sudden lunges and high-speed strikes could overwhelm even reinforced cages if conditions allowed. The incident reignited debates about whether cage diving, despite its popularity, poses an unacceptable risk to tourists. Some argued it brought awareness to conservation, while others insisted the spectacle provoked unnatural encounters that endangered both humans and animals. In the weeks that followed, tour operators faced new regulations that required them to strengthen their equipment and revise their safety measures. For Emily's family back in Britain, grief was magnified by the absence of her body. Condolence messages filled online platforms where she once shared her photography. Her final posts had now been transformed into memorials. Fellow travelers left flowers along the South African coast, their colors bright against the gray sea that had taken her. Her story became both tragedy and warning, a reminder of how even moments meant to celebrate beauty could turn into encounters with raw and uncontrollable power. The memory of her final dive lingered, etched not only into the hearts of those who witnessed it, but also into the collective understanding of the risks humans take when stepping into the domain of the ocean's greatest predator. June 12, 2025, the waters off Western Australia shimmered under the morning sun as a specialized team prepared for an inspection dive. The operation involved 6 crew members, all trained divers, assigned to assess the submerged structures of a semi-submersible sea drill. Among them was Thomas Reed, a seasoned lead engineer who had worked offshore for nearly a decade. Known for his calm approach to high-pressure situations, Thomas had gained a reputation for leading dangerous dives with precision and steady judgment. His career had been built around ensuring rigs remained safe and operational, often working in harsh conditions where risk was a daily companion. Alongside him was Maya Lopez, a diver who had joined the crew only 3 years earlier, but had already proven her resilience in difficult waters. Born and raised near coastal towns, Maya had developed a fascination with the ocean early in life, later choosing diving as both a career and a passion. Her colleagues admired her sharp memory for safety protocols and quick thinking when tasks grew complicated. For Maya, each mission was not just work but a challenge to prove herself in an industry dominated by experience and endurance. That morning the group entered the water, their wetsuits pressed tightly against the chill of the sea. They descended steadily, guided by the faint light from the surface and the beams from their helmets. Around them, the shadows of the drill's massive legs stretched down into the depths, coated in barnacles and algae that needed assessment. The divers checked for corrosion, noting patches of marine growth while communicating carefully through hand signals. The mission seemed routine, yet tension always lingered when descending into regions known to host large predators. As Thomas moved closer to the base of one of the supports, the water shifted suddenly. From below, a dark shape surged upward with explosive force. In an instant, the massive form of a great white shark, measuring 16 feet, snapped through the gloom. Its jaws clamped dangerously close to Thomas's leg, missing flesh by inches, but shaking the water violently. The strike threw him backward, scattering bubbles as his tools rattled against the structure. The entire team froze, panic spreading as the predator began to circle. Its broad body glided with deliberate menace, cutting wide arcs around the divers. Bubbles rose frantically as fins beat against the current in uneven motions. Each kick and movement seemed only to draw the animal closer, its senses tuned to vibration and distress. In that critical moment, Maya's training came to the fore. She reached for the strobe mechanism on her helmet and activated it with a sharp flick of her wrist. A burst of flashing light erupted in the water, disorienting the predator just enough to stall its approach. Meanwhile, Thomas kicked himself toward a drifting tool crate, positioning it between himself and the shark's path. The box spun slowly in the current, creating a makeshift barrier as the predator circled once more, its pale belly glinting in the beams of their lights. The divers tightened their formation, their breaths loud in their helmets, knowing that every second stretched the line between survival and disaster. The predator lingered near the crate, its shadow shifting through the beams of light, circling with unsettling calm. The divers remained close together, each breath loud inside their helmets as they tried to maintain control. For a moment, the flashing strobes and drifting barrier bought them enough space to signal upward for immediate recovery. Above, the surface team reacted quickly, lowering a steel rescue cage into the water while pulling ropes taut to guide the divers back. The sound of metal striking against the waves created more disturbance, further distracting the great white as it made another slow pass. Thomas pushed toward the moving cage with steady but cautious kicks, keeping the crate between himself and the circling predator. Maya stayed close, her helmet still flashing bright bursts that cut across the murky water. One by one, the group edged toward the rising platform, knowing that every movement had to be deliberate and precise. The predator made one last surge, brushing the side of the crate with its powerful body, before finally veering away into the deep. Relief surged through the divers as they entered the safety of the cage, their bodies trembling from both cold and adrenaline. When the crew pulled them aboard, the scene turned frantic. Helmets were removed and hands shook as the divers clambered onto the deck. Thomas sank against the rails, pale and shivering, his legs scraped and bruised from the near strike. Maya sat nearby, her breathing ragged, but her quick thinking was credited for saving the team. The others spoke little, stunned by how fast the encounter had unfolded and how narrowly they had escaped. As the drill vessel returned to shore, reports were filed and safety officers documented every detail. Experts later explained that unusual seal movements in the region had likely drawn the predator closer to the rig than normal. The combination of flashing lights, metal vibrations, and divers thrashing in tight quarters created the perfect scenario for the animal to investigate aggressively. In the aftermath, company officials reviewed emergency procedures, stressing the importance of protective cages and surface monitoring whenever dives were scheduled in predator-rich areas. For the crew involved, the event left lasting marks. Some faced nights haunted by the image of pale jaws breaking through the gloom, while others found themselves hesitant to return to deep-water tasks. Maya was praised for her courage, yet she admitted that the memory of the slow circling shadow would never fade. The sea drill resumed work weeks later, but for those present on June 12, 2025, the ocean had revealed its true and merciless power. On September 12, 2024, the early morning sun painted Cape Canaveral, Florida, in golden light, as weekend visitors trickled onto the beach, expecting a quiet day. The humid air carried the scent of salt and sunscreen, and gentle waves rolled steadily against the shore, creating an atmosphere of calm routine. Families set up umbrellas, joggers traced the waterline, and fishermen cast into the surf, unaware of the terrifying event about to unfold. At 8:15 a.m., a sudden commotion rippled through the shallow surf. Beachgoers pointed and whispered, their voices tight with disbelief. Beneath the water, an immense shadow shifted, its size impossible to ignore. Moments later, the cause revealed itself. A great white shark, easily 20 feet long, stranded in the shallows. Its sleek gray back gleamed in the sunlight as it thrashed desperately against the sand and tide, a spectacle both extraordinary and horrifying. The Coast Guard arrived swiftly, their vehicles crunching across the hard sand as officers leapt out, assessing the scene with practiced urgency. They quickly roped off the immediate area, instructing onlookers to retreat while trying to maintain calm amidst rising panic. People hovered just beyond the barriers, phones raised, hearts racing, captivated and terrified by the sight of a creature usually confined to distant ocean depths, now writhing only yards away. Its tail flicked weakly at first, sending small arcs of water across the sand, the soft hiss of displaced sand punctuated by occasional low guttural groans of the animal's effort to right itself. The shark's eyes, dark and reflective, seemed to fix on nothing, yet they radiated a raw, primal intelligence that made the crowd instinctively recoil. A Coast Guard crew member, a 34-year-old man named Daniel Harper, cautiously approached with a long, reinforced pole, intending to prod the shark's dorsal fin and determine whether it was alive or had succumbed to the shallow stranding. His boots sank slightly into the wet sand, and every movement was deliberate, calculated to avoid startling the already panicked animal. The moment the tip of the pole contacted the fin, the shark reacted with terrifying speed, its massive body exploding into sudden, violent motion. Water and sand erupted into the air as its tail slammed across the shore, creating a miniature tsunami that knocked over umbrellas and sent coolers and beach bags skittering across the sand. Harper lost his footing, stumbling backward into a small dune, while another officer beside him was caught in the spray, tumbling sideways onto the sand. The crowd screamed, panic igniting as the sheer power of the animal became undeniably clear. The shark slid further toward the incoming tide, its head dipping low as jaws snapped repeatedly, each motion producing a wet, horrifying clap against the shallow bottom. Its teeth, serrated and massive, gleamed as the morning sun reflected off their wet surfaces, close enough to graze the surf line where children had moments earlier played. The officers struggled to maintain a perimeter, but the animal's thrashing sent debris flying in all directions, umbrellas collapsing, surfboards toppling, and sandboards sliding into the shallow water. The crowd's hysteria grew. Some retreated further up the beach, others frozen in disbelief, unable to tear their eyes from the unfolding chaos. The shark's movements were erratic but controlled, each whip of its tail and sudden surge toward deeper water demonstrating its immense strength and instinctual drive to survive. For what felt like an eternity but was only minutes, the scene teetered on the edge of disaster. Harper and his team worked feverishly, signaling to the crowd to move further back, their eyes never leaving the great white. The officers' radios crackled with terse updates as Coast Guard boats in the shallows prepared to assist if the shark broke completely free from the sand, while photographers and social media streams captured every intense moment. The animal's body arched and twisted, scales scraping against the sand, water spraying in thick sheets until finally, a larger incoming wave caught it. The water lifted the creature almost effortlessly, a sudden surge that pulled the shark backward, away from the panicked crowd, back into the deeper surf where it could regain its strength. As the wave receded, the great white's dorsal fin sliced through the water one last time, cutting a solitary sleek line across the morning tide before vanishing beneath the surface, leaving only a disturbed wake and the stunned silence of onlookers. Harper and his team exhaled collectively, muscles trembling from adrenaline, aware that the day could have ended in disaster, that the thin margin between safety and tragedy had been crossed in mere seconds. The sand, littered with strewn beach equipment, bore testament to the shark's raw power, while the smell of salt, wet sand, and fear hung thickly in the air. Beachgoers, some wide-eyed, some shaken to the core, began to retreat or gather their belongings, the memory of the morning's near catastrophe etched into their minds. The Coast Guard lingered for over an hour, ensuring the shark had fully returned to safe waters before slowly dismantling the emergency perimeter. Local authorities coordinated with marine biologists to monitor the area, speculating on what might have caused the shark to strand in such an unusual manner, considering factors such as disorientation, injury, or pursuit of prey. Crowds thinned, conversations hushed into murmurs, and the beach slowly returned to its normal rhythm. However, a palpable tension lingered, a subtle reminder that the ocean, seemingly placid, could produce moments of terrifying unpredictability. By late morning, the surf was calm again, the sun climbing higher, but the events of the early hours had left an indelible mark. The 20-foot predator had vanished beneath the waves, leaving only memories and scattered debris as evidence of its presence. Daniel Harper stood on the sand, watching the horizon where the shark had disappeared, a mixture of awe and unease settling in his chest, acutely aware that such raw displays of power could never truly be contained, only witnessed and respected. On the morning of July 6, 2019, the waters off Gansby, South Africa, glimmered under a pale winter sun, the air crisp with the scent of sea salt and the faint tang of diesel from passing boats. A luxury yacht, white and gleaming, cut through the calm swell, carrying a family of 4 who had chartered it to celebrate a milestone birthday. The vessel's polished deck reflected the morning light. At the same time, champagne glasses, towels, and cameras were scattered across the railings and seating areas, a testament to the leisurely pace of the day. Among the passengers was 17-year-old Liam van der Merwe, tall and athletic for his age, his dark hair ruffled by the wind, leaning over the railing to capture photos of the sea, eager to immortalize the sparkling waves and the frothing wake of their yacht. At first, the ocean seemed peaceful, the occasional porpoise or diving seabird the only signs of life, masking the deadly presence that waited silently beneath the surface. Without warning, the serene surface exploded. A massive shadow, triangular and unmistakable, surged upward from the depths, its sleek gray and white body cutting through the water with terrifying speed. The shark, a 16-foot great white, struck with precise force, clamping its powerful jaws onto Liam's leg. In an instant, the boy was yanked violently over the railing, his body disappearing beneath the icy water as screams tore from his parents, echoed by the crew on deck who scrambled to respond. The cold bite of the sea enveloped him, the shock and pain combined with the unrelenting power of the predator to make survival a distant hope. Panic erupted on the deck, the polished wood slippery with spilled drinks and sweat, as the family watched helplessly. The roar of waves and the crash of bodies created a chaotic symphony of fear. The shark's thrashing was merciless. Its powerful tail whipped the water into frothy torrents, each surge dragging Liam further from the vessel, tearing at the wetsuit and flesh alike, leaving a trail of blood in the turquoise sea. Crew members leapt into action, the yacht's captain maneuvering to follow the predator. In contrast, others grabbed flotation devices, ropes, and rescue hooks, desperately trying to reach the boy before the attack claimed him completely. Yet every approach was met with renewed aggression. The shark struck repeatedly, circling with the precision of a predator accustomed to striking fear into larger creatures, the raw animal power on display impossible to counter with human effort alone. For tense, unbearable minutes, the family and crew battled against instinct, physics, and sheer terror. Every wave seemed to hide the predator, every splash a potential strike, while the boy's leg was violently pulled beneath the surface, the frantic effort to keep him afloat failing against the shark's superior strength. The yacht's polished rails were slick, the deck slick with water, and the cries of parents and crew mingled with the roar of the engine as the captain tried to close the distance without endangering others on board. Despite every attempt, it became horrifyingly clear that human intervention could not overcome the raw force of the apex predator in its domain. Finally, after what felt like eternity but was measured in excruciating minutes, the great white retreated, sliding back into deeper water, leaving only disturbed waves and drifting debris in its wake. The family stood frozen, grief-stricken and trembling, staring at the calm sea that seemed suddenly alien and menacing. The quiet that returned to the morning a cruel contrast to the chaos that had unfolded moments before. The yacht's crew, trained for emergencies but shaken to their core, attended to the parents, offering blankets, restraining support, and words that could not soothe the immediate horror or erase the image of their son dragged into the depths. The water, once glittering and inviting, now bore the ominous reminder of the ocean's unchecked power. the presence of a predator both majestic and merciless, and the fragile boundary that separated life from death in its domain. Authorities later reviewed the events, noting that the week had seen unusually aggressive behavior among great whites in Gansbai, a phenomenon likely influenced by seasonal patterns, water temperature, and the abundance of prey in the area. Marine biologists speculated that the predator, a mature male, had become particularly bold, habituated to human presence near tourist vessels, and driven by instinctive hunger and territorial assertion. While the specific circumstances of Liam's attack were tragic, experts emphasized that the combination of human proximity, sudden movement, and the shark's natural predatory instincts created a near-impossible scenario for survival once contact was made. The aftermath left a lasting scar on the van der Merwe family, who returned home in stunned silence, their lives irrevocably altered by the sudden and violent loss. Psychological support and counseling were immediate priorities, yet nothing could replace the absence of their teenage son, whose life had been claimed by a force that operated outside human control. The incident became a somber example cited in marine safety briefings, emphasizing the need for vigilance around known predator zones, the unpredictable nature of apex predators, and the narrow line that separates recreational activity from disaster at sea. On the waters of Gansbai, the waves continued their unrelenting rhythm, indifferent to human tragedy. Tourists would still charter yachts, divers would still explore the cold depths, and fishermen would continue their work, all under the constant silent watch of creatures capable of astonishing power. Yet for those who had witnessed the morning's events, the ocean would never appear entirely calm again. Every ripple, shadow, and movement beneath the surface carried with it the echo of the attack, a grim reminder of the unbridled force of nature and the frailty of those who venture too close. On August 12, 2025, the bright summer sun hung over the Algarve coast of Portugal, casting a golden light across the calm Atlantic waters. Tourists filled the beaches, but farther out, thrill-seekers tested themselves against the sea. Among them was Adrian Costa, a 26-year-old athlete known to his friends for his daring nature and love of extreme water sports. Born in Lisbon, Adrian had spent his childhood near the ocean, learning to surf, dive, and handle boats before most of his peers. His adventurous spirit led him into kneeboarding, a sport that combined the speed of a motorboat with the balance and agility of board riding. For him, it was not just a pastime but a way to challenge limits and capture moments of adrenaline. Adrian was no stranger to risk. After completing his studies in marine biology, he dedicated a significant portion of his time to exploring ocean ecosystems. His knowledge of the sea only deepened his respect for it. Yet he believed that calculated risks brought him closer to the raw forces of nature. The Algarve was his favorite location, where clear skies and blue waters gave the perfect stage for pushing his skills further. That morning, Adrian set out with a group of friends who shared his passion for the subject. They rented a small speedboat and prepared their boards, joking and cheering as they took turns performing tricks near floating buoys. The sea was calm, a deceptive stillness hiding what lay below. When his turn came, Adrian tightened his grip on the tow rope and balanced on his kneeboard, ready to perform daring spins across the surface. As the boat accelerated, the board skimmed gracefully, cutting across ripples with speed. Adrian leaned into turns, lifting sprays of salt water into the air. He performed spins near the markers, pushing closer each time, drawing cheers from the spectators on the boat. For him, the water was alive beneath his board, a place of energy and control. But under the surface, unseen, something else was drawn to the vibrations and splashes. From the depths, a shadow approached with alarming speed. A 10-foot short-fin mako shark, one of the fastest predators in the ocean, surged upward. The moment was sudden and brutal. Its jaws clamped hard onto Adrian's lower leg, tearing through wetsuit and skin with terrifying force. The impact sent him crashing off the board, his body slamming into the water as the rope slipped from his grasp. Adrian thrashed violently, the shock of pain mixing with panic as red streaks swirled around him. His heart pounded as he kicked wildly, trying to break free from the predator's grip. The board floated nearby, rocking uselessly in the disturbed water. The shark released him but did not retreat. It circled aggressively, snapping at the board, and at every splash, its speed slicing through the waves. On the boat, his friends screamed and splashed with paddles, trying to distract the predator. Their frantic movements echoed across the sea, buying precious moments as Adrian fought to stay afloat. Every second stretched into an eternity, the fin slicing closer each time it turned. The shark's circles tightened as it darted back toward the flailing rider, snapping at the board and slicing through the red-tinted foam. Adrian's body ached. His leg was torn and weak, but survival forced him to kick hard and reach for the floating board. His fingers gripped its edge as the predator rushed past again, its powerful body cutting a wake that rocked him violently. Each pass brought the animal closer, its jaws opening wide before closing with a thunderous snap that echoed through the water. The small speedboat maneuvered quickly, its engine roaring as it cut across the waves toward him. The crew pounded the surface with paddles, sending noise and splashes across the area. The predator twisted away for an instant, distracted by the racket, before turning back with renewed focus. Adrian clung desperately to the board, pulling himself halfway on as his arms shook from exhaustion. Blood continued to flow from his leg, clouding the water around him and fueling the animal's persistence. The shark struck again, ramming the board and nearly flipping it. Adrian was thrown sideways, his body half submerged as he scrambled to hold on. The predator bit into the board's edge, tearing away foam and plastic, its teeth leaving deep grooves as fragments floated to the surface. With each snap, the situation grew more dire, and his strength faded. In a final coordinated effort, the boat crew edged close enough for two riders to reach out. One splashed furiously with a rope, while another extended a pole, striking the water near the fin. The predator spun, startled by the sudden noise, its body twisting away with a powerful flick of its tail. In that brief moment, Adrian was pulled across the side of the vessel, collapsing onto the deck with a heavy thud. His face was pale, his chest heaving with ragged breaths as seawater streamed from his wetsuit. The group pressed cloth against his leg, the deep lacerations gaping and swollen. Bruises covered his body from the struggle, and blood continued to seep through makeshift bandages. The boat sped back toward the coast, its bow cutting clean lines across the sea as the dorsal fin disappeared behind them. Relief washed over the group, but silence lingered, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of Adrian's shallow breathing. At the marina, medical crews rushed him into an ambulance. Surgeons later confirmed multiple deep cuts along his lower leg, with muscle damage but no loss of bone. His survival was credited to the fast reaction of his companions and the distraction efforts that kept the predator from striking again. The wounds required surgery and months of rehabilitation, but he was alive. News of the attack spread across the Algarve, shocking both locals and visitors. Experts explained that short-fin macos are among the fastest sharks, capable of bursts of speed that make sudden encounters particularly dangerous. They are drawn to rapid movement and unusual splashing, behaviors common in water sports like kneeboarding. For Adrian, the experience left more than scars. His passion for the ocean remained, but the memory of teeth tearing through the board and the helplessness of floating in bloodied water followed him long after his body healed. The encounter became a reminder that the sea, however beautiful, holds dangers that demand respect from even the most skilled riders. The pristine waters surrounding the coral formations near Queensland, Australia, had long served as a backdrop for high-end fashion photography. On October 5, 2021, these same crystal-clear depths would become the site of one of the most tragic underwater modeling incidents in recent history. The area, renowned for its exceptional visibility extending beyond 60 meters, attracted photographers from around the globe seeking to capture ethereal underwater imagery. Maya Collins, a 26-year-old fashion model from Brisbane, had built her career on specialized underwater shoots. Her ability to hold her breath for extended periods and move gracefully while submerged made her highly sought after in the niche market of aquatic fashion photography. The project that brought her to these remote waters was an ambitious collaboration with renowned photographer Sebastian Hartwell and his assistant team of 5 experienced divers. Hartwell had spent months planning the shoot, which involved capturing Collins in flowing designer gowns that would create dramatic silhouettes against the coral backdrop. The concept required Collins to descend to approximately 20 feet below the surface, where the interplay of natural light and fabric movement would create the desired artistic effect. Safety protocols included multiple dive masters, emergency oxygen supplies, and constant communication via underwater hand signals. The morning conditions appeared ideal for their ambitious project. Water temperature held steady at 26 degrees Celsius, with minimal current and exceptional visibility. Collins had completed her safety briefing and equipment check, wearing a specially designed weighted belt that would allow her to achieve neutral buoyancy while maintaining graceful movement in the flowing gowns. The first series of shots proceeded flawlessly. Collins descended gracefully, her emerald silk dress billowing around her like liquid mercury. Hartwell positioned himself 15 feet away, his underwater camera housing capturing the interplay of sunlight filtering through the fabric. The assistant divers maintained their positions around the perimeter, monitoring both Collins and the surrounding water for any potential hazards. 23 minutes into the session, Collins was preparing for her most challenging pose. The sequence required her to suspend herself horizontally at 20 feet depth, arms extended upward toward the surface, while the gown's fabric created an otherworldly silhouette. Hartwell had calculated the lighting angles precisely, and the entire team held their positions to capture what they anticipated would be the signature image of the collection. The tiger shark approached from the deeper water beyond the coral formation, drawn by the unusual activity, and surface splashing from the support boat above. Measuring approximately 13 feet in length, the predator moved with the calculated precision of an apex hunter that had survived decades in these waters. Its distinctive striped pattern remained partially camouflaged against the shifting light patterns filtering down from the surface. Collins was fully focused on maintaining her pose when the attack occurred. The shark struck with devastating speed, its powerful jaws clamping around her legs with crushing force. The impact sent shockwaves through the water as Collins was violently yanked from her suspended position. Her carefully controlled breathing technique immediately collapsed as panic and pain overwhelmed her system. Hartwell and his dive team witnessed the attack unfold in horrifying slow motion. The photographer immediately dropped his camera equipment and swam toward Collins, while his assistants began striking their dive tanks with metal objects to create noise and distraction. The metallic clanging echoed through the water as the team deployed every deterrent technique they had trained for. The tiger shark's thrashing intensified as it dragged Collins deeper toward the coral formation. Her flowing gown, which had created such beautiful imagery moments before, now tangled around both predator and victim. The silk fabric restricted Collins' movements while potentially confusing the shark's sensory systems. Two of the dive masters reached the attack site and began striking the shark with their diving knives and camera equipment. The predator's hide proved remarkably resistant to their desperate attempts at intervention. Collins disappeared beneath the shark's bulk as it continued its characteristic side-to-side thrashing motion. After nearly 90 seconds of chaos, the tiger shark released its grip and retreated toward deeper water. The dive team immediately surrounded Collins, but her injuries proved catastrophic. Despite their advanced training and immediate response, the combination of massive trauma and prolonged submersion had proven fatal. The emergency ascent and surface rescue procedures were executed flawlessly, but Collins was pronounced dead upon reaching the support vessel. The entire attack had been inadvertently captured on Hartwell's underwater cameras, providing marine biologists with unprecedented footage of tiger shark predatory behavior in shallow reef environments. Australian authorities later confirmed unusually high tiger shark activity throughout the region that month. Marine biologists theorized that changing water temperatures and abundant fish populations had drawn larger predators into areas typically considered safe for diving activities. The incident prompted immediate changes to underwater photography safety protocols, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and the presence of armed dive masters during all commercial shoots in open water environments. Hartwell discontinued underwater fashion photography following the tragedy, while Collins's family established a foundation promoting water safety education. The incident remains one of the most documented fatal shark attacks in Australian waters, serving as a sobering reminder that even controlled professional environments cannot eliminate the inherent risks of entering the ocean's domain. On August 9, 2024, the waters off Mauritius shimmered under the midday sun as a group of 8 tourists set sail on a catamaran excursion. Among them was Thomas Keller, a 41-year-old German traveler who had long dreamed of exploring the Indian Ocean. A seasoned adventurer, Thomas had spent years climbing mountains in Europe and hiking trails across South America, but he had always been drawn to the sea. He often traveled with small groups seeking experiences that pushed him beyond his comfort zone, and this trip was meant to be one more memory in his growing list of adventures. The catamaran carried both seasoned sailors and newcomers, with laughter and conversation filling the air as the vessel cut across the waves. The turquoise waters sparkled, and for most of the passengers, the day seemed perfect. Thomas leaned on the railing, soaking in the wide horizon, grateful for the chance to witness the raw beauty of Mauritius from the sea. The group included couples, friends, and solo travelers, all united by the thrill of sailing across open water. By afternoon, the weather began to shift. The once gentle winds grew sharp, sending ripples across the surface. The crew attempted to adjust the sails, but the gusts strengthened with alarming speed. Within minutes, the catamaran tilted sharply under the force. Shouts filled the air as the vessel heaved again, and then, in a violent surge, it overturned. Wood, gear, and supplies were scattered across the surface as the tourists plunged into the sea. The survivors clung desperately to floating debris and life jackets. The waves tossed them in every direction, pulling them away from the overturned hull. Panic set in as they tried to regroup, their voices breaking through the wind and water. Thomas gripped a broken plank, his heart racing as he was determined to stay afloat until help arrived. Then the surface broke with a sight that sent fear surging through every survivor. Dark dorsal fins cut across the waves. Oceanic whitetips, known for their persistence in open water, had been drawn by the splashing and the traces of blood from cuts and scrapes. The sharks circled closer, their sleek forms moving just beneath the surface. The first strike came without warning. One of the predators lunged at a man gripping a life jacket, its jaws locking onto his arm. He was yanked beneath the surface in a violent thrash, water foaming red as he kicked frantically. For an agonizing moment it seemed he would not reappear, but then he broke free, gasping, his arm torn and bleeding. Another predator struck at floating debris, ramming it hard enough to knock one survivor into deeper water. Screams echoed across the waves as the group thrashed, pulling one another back toward anything that floated. The circling fins only grew closer, cutting through the chaos with chilling patience. The fins carved tight circles around the scattered tourists, each pass drawing closer. The man who had been bitten clutched his torn arm against his chest, his face pale as waves carried him toward the others. Blood trailed from his wounds, staining the water and keeping the predators fixed on the group. Every splash seemed to pull the sharks back in, their blunt heads cutting through foam before disappearing again into the depths. One of the survivors was struck by a sudden surge as another predator rammed a broken piece of wood, flipping it aside. A woman who had clung to it was thrown into open water, her body spinning as she kicked desperately. The group shouted in panic, their arms stretching to pull her back before the sharks closed in. She managed to grab hold of a floating cushion, her breathing ragged as she pressed herself against it. For nearly 20 minutes the animals circled without rest. They brushed against legs, bumped debris, and made sudden lunges that sent fear surging through the group. Thomas held tight to his plank, his muscles burning from exhaustion. Each second felt stretched as if time itself had slowed, while the fins cut patterns around them with relentless patience. The survivors moved together, trying to form a loose cluster, knowing that straying even a few feet from the group could draw the predators closer. The sea became a mix of foam, shouts, and the sharp glint of dorsal fins rising and falling. Some of the sharks snapped at objects floating near the survivors, tearing at straps and splinters, their teeth shredding anything they could clamp onto. Each strike brought a new rush of fear as the group braced for another attack. Rescue finally came when nearby motorboats, alerted by distress signals, closed in on the scene. Crew members leaned over the sides, striking the water with poles and paddles to drive the predators back. Engines roared, sending vibrations through the sea that broke the rhythm of the circling fins. One by one, the survivors were hauled aboard, their bodies battered, bruised, and bleeding from cuts. The man who had been bitten was lifted carefully, his arm wrapped tight in cloth to slow the bleeding. When the last survivor was pulled onto the deck, the crew wasted no time turning away from the sight. The slick of blood trailed behind them as the fins faded back into the open sea, the animals unwilling to follow once the noise and motion of the boats dominated the surface. The passengers collapsed onto the floor, their limbs shaking from cold, exhaustion, and shock. Doctors later treated deep cuts, bruising, and torn skin from both the bite and the scrapes caused by debris. No one had been killed, but the physical and emotional toll was immense. Experts explained that oceanic whitetips are highly opportunistic, and in cases of shipwrecks or overturned boats, they are among the most dangerous species because of their persistence. For the 8 who endured that afternoon, the memory of fins slicing around them in endless circles would remain long after their bodies had healed. The coastal waters off Santa Barbara, California, had always been a playground for thrill seekers, but on September 1st, 2025, those pristine waves nearly became a graveyard. The area, known for its consistent offshore winds and relatively calm morning conditions, had become increasingly popular among extreme sports enthusiasts. Local marine biologists had noted an uptick in seal populations along the nearby Channel Islands, which inevitably drew larger predators closer to shore during the late summer months. Ethan Walker, a 29-year-old aerospace engineer from San Diego, had been perfecting his jetpack techniques for nearly 3 years. His companions that morning were equally experienced. Lila Morgan, a 26-year-old stunt coordinator from Los Angeles, and Tyler Chen, a 31-year-old former Navy pilot turned extreme sports instructor. The trio had planned their session for dawn, when tourist boat traffic remained minimal. and wind conditions provided optimal stability for their aerial maneuvers. Walker had invested considerable time researching the perfect location for their most ambitious routine yet. The plan involved synchronized barrel rolls, water-skimming passes, and formation flying that would push their equipment to its limits. Each rider carried military-grade jetpacks capable of sustained flight for up to 12 minutes, with emergency flotation systems and GPS tracking devices as safety measures. The morning began flawlessly. Morgan executed a series of tight spirals approximately 15 feet above the water's surface, her jetpack's exhaust creating small steam clouds as it interacted with the cool ocean air. Chen demonstrated his signature move, diving to within inches of the waves before pulling up sharply in a vertical climb. Walker focused on maintaining formation while recording their stunts with a helmet-mounted camera system. 23 minutes into their session, Chen attempted his most challenging maneuver, a double-spin dive that would take him directly through the jetpack wash of his companions. He initiated the rotation at 40 feet altitude, building momentum as he descended. The mathematical precision required for such a stunt left little margin for error, and Chen had practiced the timing countless times in simulators. However, a minor turbulence pocket created by Walker's jetpack exhaust disrupted Chen's stabilization system mid-spin. His gyroscope readings fluctuated wildly as he fought to regain control, but the centrifugal force had already committed him to the descent trajectory. Chen managed to activate his emergency stabilizers, but the correction came too late. He struck the water's surface at approximately 30 miles per hour. His jetpack's thrust immediately cut by the impact sensors. The saltwater was surprisingly cold for early September, and Chen found himself momentarily disoriented as his life vest automatically inflated. His jetpack, now waterlogged and useless, dragged him down briefly before the emergency release mechanism activated. He surfaced sputtering approximately 60 yards from shore, while Walker and Morgan circled overhead, shouting instructions about swimming toward the beach. What none of them noticed was the massive shadow gliding through the deeper water beyond the kelp beds. The great white shark measured approximately 15 feet in length and weighed close to 3,000 pounds. It had been tracking a wounded sea lion for the better part of an hour when the sudden disturbance above caught its attention. The predator's electroreceptors detected Chen's elevated heart rate and the unusual electromagnetic signatures from the waterlogged jetpack equipment. Chen had managed to swim roughly 20 yards toward shore when he felt something brush against his legs. Initially dismissing it as kelp, he continued his steady stroke pattern while calling out to his companions that he was uninjured. Walker and Morgan had descended to approximately 10 feet above the water, preparing to attempt a rescue maneuver they had practiced, but never executed in real conditions. The shark struck with devastating speed and precision. Chen's world exploded into chaos as massive jaws clamped around both his legs just above the knees. The initial bite pressure, estimated later at over 4,000 pounds per square inch, crushed through his wetsuit material and into flesh. The shark's serrated teeth, each measuring up to 3 inches in length, penetrated deep tissue as the predator began its characteristic thrashing motion designed to disorient and weaken prey. Walker and Morgan watched in horror as their friend disappeared beneath a churning mass of white water and blood. Morgan immediately descended to water level, using her jetpack's downward thrust to create maximum splash and noise. Walker circled frantically, shouting tactical instructions while trying to position himself for a potential rescue attempt. Underwater, Chen fought against primal terror as the shark dragged him deeper. The predator's dead black eyes, each the size of a tennis ball, stared at him with ancient hunger. Chen managed to grab the shark's snout with both hands, pushing upward while kicking with his injured legs. The pain was extraordinary, but adrenaline provided temporary strength. Walker made a split-second decision that would later be called either incredibly brave or completely reckless. He shut down his jetpack and dropped directly into the water beside the attack site, carrying the pack's metal stabilizer bar as an improvised weapon. The bar, designed to prevent equipment damage during hard landings, measured 3 feet in length and weighed 12 pounds. As Chen and the shark breached the surface in a violent spray of foam and blood, Walker drove the stabilizer bar directly into the predator's gill slits. The shark's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Chen to break free and swim desperately toward Morgan, who had positioned herself as close to the water as her hovering jetpack would allow. The great white circled once, its primitive brain processing this unusual encounter. Walker continued striking at the water with his improvised weapon while Morgan created maximum surface disturbance with her jetpack's thrust. After what felt like hours but lasted perhaps 90 seconds, the shark's dorsal fin disappeared into deeper water. Coast Guard rescue boats, alerted by the GPS emergency signals from their equipment, arrived within 12 minutes. Chen was airlifted to a trauma center with severe lacerations to both legs, substantial blood loss, and symptoms of shock. Walker suffered minor cuts from debris, while Morgan escaped physically unharmed, but deeply traumatized. Marine biologists later confirmed that great white shark activity had increased dramatically along the California coast that week, with multiple sightings reported from Monterey to San Diego. Experts theorized that unusual water temperatures and abundant prey had drawn larger predators closer to shore than typically observed. All 3 riders survived the encounter, though Chen required extensive reconstructive surgery and months of rehabilitation. The incident prompted new safety protocols for extreme water sports, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and emergency response training. Walker and Morgan never flew together again, each pursuing safer hobbies far from the ocean's unpredictable. On April 18, 2022, the mouth of the Black River in St. Lucia glistened under a morning sun that promised warmth and adventure. The air thick with humidity and the faint aroma of tropical vegetation. 6 friends, all in their mid-20s and seasoned in outdoor recreation, had set out early to navigate the river's twisting channels, eager to experience the thrill of whitewater rafting in the Caribbean. Among them was 26-year-old Daniel Thompson, tall and lean with strong arms honed from years of kayaking and climbing, whose adventurous spirit had inspired the group to tackle this challenging stretch of river. The raft bobbed gently in the murky water, the sound of rushing rapids growing steadily louder as they approached the first major set. The current pulled them inexorably toward the swirling turbulence that promised both excitement and danger. The morning began like any other expedition. The rafters laughed and shouted, paddles slicing through the water in coordinated bursts as they navigated smaller eddies and minor drops. Birds wheeled overhead, and the distant canopy of mangroves rustled softly in the wind, casting long shadows over the water. Yet beneath the surface, the river concealed a threat few had anticipated. Bull sharks, known for their boldness and adaptability, prowled in the brackish water, drawn to the murky, fast-flowing currents where prey could be caught unexpectedly. The group, focused on their maneuvering and the rapids ahead, had no awareness of the large, dark shapes moving silently beneath them, their presence betrayed only by the subtle change in water movement that escaped casual notice. Suddenly, the river erupted. A violent set of rapids tossed the raft into a chaotic tumble, splintering momentum and sending several paddlers partially overboard. In the ensuing chaos, a massive 7-foot bull shark surged from the depths, its muscular body cutting through the water with terrifying intent. Daniel, caught off guard as he braced against the waves, felt a sudden excruciating impact as the predator clamped its powerful jaws onto his leg, thrashing violently. Foam and spray erupted around him, debris from the overturned raft scattering, paddles and floating gear tossed into the surging water. The violence of the attack ripped him from the raft, dragging him beneath the swirling currents with the strength of a living, relentless machine. The remaining friends reacted instantly, screaming and thrashing in the water as they tried to fend off the predator with whatever they could grasp: paddles, oars, and sections of the raft itself. Another bull shark lunged at floating gear, snapping teeth into foam and plastic, scattering the remaining rafters in panic. The water churned violently, waves and foam mixing with a crimson sheen that testified to the power of the predator and the injuries inflicted on Daniel. Every movement became a desperate balance of survival and instinct. The friends' arms straining as they attempted to push the shark away, while avoiding further bites themselves. Their yells and splashing only seemed to attract more attention, the predator's acute senses attuned to the commotion, heightening the peril in those terrifying second-stretched minutes. Despite their desperate attempts, Daniel was pulled deeper into the turbulent river, disappearing beneath the froth and spray as the shark maintained its grip. The friends clung to floating debris, holding onto sections of the upturned raft and each other, their muscles trembling from exertion and terror. The river, usually a source of exhilaration and beauty, had transformed into a churning corridor of chaos, the sound of rushing water blending with the screams of the group and the splashes of the predatory attack. Adrenaline surged through their bodies, sharpening focus and reaction. Yet the force of the bull shark and the speed of the current left little room for effective intervention. Rescue teams arrived minutes later, having been alerted by concerned guides and other adventurers downstream. Their boats cut through the water with engines roaring, ropes and flotation devices readied for immediate deployment. The teams maneuvered skillfully through the rapids, pulling their remaining friends aboard with practiced efficiency. Their faces set in grim concentration as they scanned the water for signs of Daniel. The river calmed slightly downstream, but the chaotic aftermath bore clear evidence of the violent encounter. Overturned rafts, scattered gear, disturbed sediment, and the faint trace of blood staining the water's surface. Tragically, despite exhaustive efforts, Daniel could not be recovered. The violence of the attack and the treacherous currents had claimed his life, leaving the remaining friends exhausted, grief-stricken, and silently shaken to their core. Authorities later emphasized the inherent danger of bull sharks in shallow, fast-flowing river mouths, such as the Black River, highlighting their opportunistic aggression and remarkable adaptability to environments where prey and human activity intersect. Experts noted that the combination of turbulent water, panic, and the proximity of humans created conditions in which even experienced rafters could fall victim to these apex predators. The incident was thoroughly analyzed, and safety protocols for rafting in the area were reviewed and reinforced, emphasizing vigilance, preparedness, and the use of additional safety measures when navigating waters prone to shark activity. The tragedy left a lasting mark on those who survived, their adventure forever transformed from excitement and camaraderie into a story of loss and caution. The remaining friends returned to the shore trembling, their wet clothes clinging to sunburned skin, faces pale from shock, yet profoundly grateful to have escaped with their lives. Each glance toward the river's dark, swirling channels carried with it the memory of Daniel's struggle, the force of the predator, and the suddenness with which the familiar world of adventure had turned into a battle for survival. Words could not convey the terror and helplessness experienced in those critical minutes, and the image of their friend pulled beneath the currents remained etched into their minds with unyielding clarity. The story of Daniel Thompson became a sobering example for all who ventured into these waters, a stark reminder that in the realm of apex predators, even the most prepared, skilled, and cautious humans could find themselves at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. The Black River, which had once promised exhilaration and adventure, now bore the memory of loss and a lesson in respect, vigilance, and humility in the face of nature's most powerful and unpredictable inhabitants.